Picture this. It's 4,000 years ago. The sun is already burning. The Nile is glittering in the morning light. And a construction worker named Amenhotep just received his paycheck for the week. It was 3 jugs of beer. He was thrilled. Welcome to ancient Egypt, a civilization that has been misunderstood for centuries. You've seen the movies. Thousands of slaves dragging giant stones across the desert. A cruel pharaoh cracking a whip. Hebrew prisoners building the pyramids in agony. Here's the thing though, almost none of that actually happened. The real ancient Egypt was something far stranger, far more interesting, and honestly, far more fun than Hollywood ever showed you. So today, we're going inside, past the pharaohs, past the mummies, past the movie posters, and into the actual daily life of the people who built one of the greatest civilizations on Earth. And it all starts with a question that nobody really asks. Why did they build the pyramids in the first place? The answer, most people assume, is simple: death. Egypt was obsessed with death. Tombs, mummies, the underworld. It was a grim, death-worshipping culture. Except, no, that's completely backwards. The Egyptians weren't obsessed with death, they were obsessed with life. Specifically, they loved life so much that they couldn't imagine it ending. So they invented an afterlife that was just more life. Same Egypt, same food, same family, same festivals, same beer, just forever. Think about that for a moment. Their version of paradise was just Egypt, but eternal. And if your afterlife is going to be exactly like your real life, you'd better make your real life worth living forever. That was the philosophy that drove everything. A wise Egyptian official named Ptahhotep, who served the king around 2400 BCE, once wrote a set of life instructions for his children. His most famous line was simple: let your face shine during the time that you live. In other words, be happy, be kind, make your presence a gift to everyone around you. That was the entire point of being Egyptian. Now, of course, not everyone's life shone equally bright. Egypt was a deeply stratified society. At the top sat the king. Below him, his court, his generals, his governors. Below them, the scribes, the priests, the doctors. And at the very bottom, the farmers. The vast majority of the population, working land they didn't own, in houses they didn't own, giving most of their harvest to men they'd never meet. It sounds bleak, but here's where Egypt gets interesting. Even at the very bottom, life had meaning. Because during the flood season, when the Nile rose and swallowed the fields and farming became impossible, those same farmers went to work on something bigger: the pyramids, the temples, the great monuments of Egypt, and they were paid. Not in gold, not in coins. Egypt didn't really use coins yet. They were paid in grain and oil, and yes, beer. 3 rations of beer per day was standard issue for workers at Giza. Archaeologists have found their villages near the pyramids, their tombs, their medical records showing bones that had been set and healed, meaning someone was treating their injuries. These were not slaves driven to exhaustion. These were skilled professionals, and the state took care of them. But why would a farmer care about building a massive stone structure for a king he'd never spoken to? Because in ancient Egypt, the king wasn't just a ruler, he was the living bridge between the gods and the people. He maintained Ma'at, the divine balance of harmony and order that kept the universe running. The floods came because the king performed the right rituals. The harvests were good because the gods were pleased. And the gods were pleased because the king did his job. So when that farmer lifted a stone block into place, he wasn't doing it in fear. He was doing it because that pyramid was proof. Visible, permanent, sky-reaching proof that Egypt was blessed. That life here was the best life possible. And speaking of the king, let's talk about him for a second, because he is not quite what you'd expect either. The temples and inscriptions of ancient Egypt are full of dramatic scenes. The king, mighty and alone, slaying ferocious lions with his bare hands, hunting wild elephants through the desert, standing triumphant over mountains of dead enemies. Very impressive. Except, the royal game wardens would catch those lions first, bring them to a sealed hunting reserve. The king would then arrive, surrounded by armed guards, and the lion would be released into the enclosure. Technically, a hunt. Barely a hunt. But that wasn't really the point. In Egyptian thinking, the king performing the ritual of the hunt symbolically conquered chaos on behalf of the entire country. It wasn't theater. It was a sacred act. Every move the king made was a symbol. Every feast, every construction project, every hunt. All of it sent a message to the gods that order was being maintained down here on Earth. Now let's move up the social ladder a little. Scribes. In Egypt, scribes were practically sacred. They were believed to be specially chosen by Thoth, the god of writing and knowledge. Every word a scribe wrote, they believed, was recorded in the eternal libraries of the gods. Their work didn't just matter to the people who read it, it mattered to the divine beings who ran the universe. So being a scribe wasn't just a good career, it was a cosmic responsibility. An ancient Egyptian text, known as Dewaf's Instructions, basically served as the world's first career counseling document. Its message? Become a scribe. Every other job job is awful. Soldiers suffer, farmers work in mud, craftsmen ruin their bodies. But a scribe sits in a comfortable room, does important work, and is remembered forever. The scribes who wrote that text were, of course, scribes themselves. But here's the remarkable part. Women could be scribes too. Women could be doctors. They could own land, own businesses, sign contracts, initiate divorce, and manage their own property entirely independently. In a world where most civilizations treated women as property, Egypt treated them as citizens. 4 women ruled Egypt outright as king, the most famous two being Hatshepsut and Cleopatra. But they weren't anomalies. They were the product of a culture that, for thousands of years, had considered women legally equal to men. This was happening 4,000 years ago. Let that sink in. Of course, daily life wasn't all philosophy and gender equality. There was also a great deal of eating, drinking, playing games, and occasionally throwing yourself into dangerous river rapids for fun. Yes, that was a real thing. The Roman writer Seneca, who visited Egypt, described watching Egyptians launch themselves in tiny boats into the most violent section of the Nile rapids on purpose. They'd plunge through the churning white water, vanish under the foam, and then shoot out the other side like a human cannonball, laughing. The crowd watching was convinced they were dead. They were not dead. They were having an absolutely wonderful time. This was a culture that played hockey, handball, gymnastics, a sport called water jousting. 2 people in boats, one rowing, one trying to knock the person in the other boat into the river. They swam, they wrestled, they shot archery. They played Senet, a board game where every move represented a step in your journey through life toward the afterlife. Even their board games were philosophical. And then there were the festivals. Egypt had festivals for everything. Every god had a birthday. Every major event had a commemoration. The feast of the goddess Bastet was described as a raucous celebration where boats full of people floated down the Nile, music playing, wine flowing, and people behaving in ways that would make a modern tabloid very happy. At the center of all of it, always, was beer. Sweet, honey-flavored beer called heket. It was wages. It was medicine. It was offering to the gods. When the Greek queen, Cleopatra VII, tried to impose a beer tax, her popularity collapsed faster than her campaigns against Rome. You do not mess with the beer. And underneath all of this, the work, the festivals, the sports, the philosophy, there was one idea that held everything together. One belief that made Egyptian civilization possible. That every life mattered. That every person, from the greatest king to the lowest farmhand, was on an eternal journey. That how you treated people today, how brightly your face shone, would determine whether your heart was light enough to pass judgment in the afterlife. They believed that after death, your heart would be weighed on a great scale against a single feather, the feather of truth. If your heart was lighter than the feather, a life well lived, a life of kindness and balance you passed through. If it was heavier, you didn't. So those farmers lifted those stones, those scribes writing by lamplight, those workers accepting their beer rations at dawn. They weren't building for a king they feared. They were building for an eternity they believed in. The pyramids aren't tombs. They're a message carved in stone and aimed at the sky. We were here, we lived well, and we want you to know it.